So yesterday I took a little road trip, test ride of my new bike, and I rode over to Vancouver Island and I rode to a little town called Ladysmith. And on trips like this, obviously you have to eat food, and on each occasion that I stopped somewhere to eat, I made observations. So I listened to 3 separate conversations, and the first one was while I was having breakfast. I was in a little cafe, and at the booth behind me was a group of 4 or 5 girls, in their early 20s, I would say. And what was remarkable to me about listening to this conversation is that each of these girls discussed their past and present boyfriends and other men in their lives, and assessed them based on their own criteria of quality. This is good man, this is bad man, I hate this guy, I love this guy. But I'm characterizing it. What it really was they saw as real men, or real gentlemen, or worthwhile men, the men in their lives who set aside their own lives, set aside their own priorities in favor of these girls, enabled them to go binge drinking, enabled them to go to school by paying for them, enabled them to party, enabled them to have cars. They essentially look at men as resources, just walking wallets. And the men who did not enable them in their lives, enable their sense of entitlement, and enable them to just live lives devoid of accountability. They reviewed those men as bad men, and they viewed the ones who just gave and gave and gave and gave as good men, and that was their entire criteria for what is good and what is bad. And more remarkable than that is they each seemed to be kind of lost in a kind of confused cloud about what they were doing with their lives. They were dissatisfied, they were unhappy, they couldn't quite find satisfaction. And I didn't say a thing. I didn't turn around, I didn't engage them in conversation. I just kept to myself and ate my breakfast, but I listened. And it seems to me that when you live a life that things just come to you, that people just give you everything, where do you find satisfaction in your own accomplishments? Because you have none. Your accomplishments are simply accomplishing the task of getting people to just give you things, give you car, pay for your school, buy you clothing, buy you drinks, etc., etc. And that was the first conversation I overheard. It was early in the day. And I would not be making this video if I hadn't heard the other 2 conversations. The next one was on the ferry trip coming back from the island. I was in the cafeteria on the ferry eating something, I don't remember what. And there were 2 middle-aged women having the exact same conversation, except that it was more sophisticated. It was dealing with houses and alimony payments, and each of them had several men. Each of them were married, but they each had several men in their lives who they saw as resources. Their husbands, their brothers, their in-laws, and so on. And they had the exact same discussion that these 20-year-old girls had earlier in the day, except for much bigger stakes, for much more money. And it was a bizarre moment of revelation for me, that at age 21, 22, and then at age 45 to 50, the exact same conversation is going on. And these 2 middle-aged women were as confused and angry and walking in a cloud of entitlement and dissatisfaction, exactly the same way the 21-year-olds in the cafe earlier in the day had been. And then the third conversation that I overheard. I was back in Vancouver. I had dropped off my bike. I was in the liquor store buying a case of beer. And standing in line, there's a guy who's in his early 30s and his girlfriend, who's probably the same age, having, well, probably not girlfriend, probably just his female friend, based on the way the conversation went. But they were having a quiet argument, and the woman was telling him that he had to carry her purse and her hat and her beer and something else and her shopping. And he was saying, well, why would I do that? Why would I do all of that? Because he had his own stuff to carry. And who chimed in was the sales clerk at the liquor store and another customer, all of whom admonished this guy to be a gentleman, to be a real man. But the definition of real man seems to be personal servant. A person who is completely selfless in the worst way, who literally sacrifices themselves for trivial concerns for someone else. And I, of course, kept my mouth shut. I didn't say a thing. I was quite far back in the line. But each of these conversations was a conversation in which the definition of a good or of a real man or of a gentleman is being redefined, perhaps not redefined, but is being defined as a man who is a slave, a man who is just a source of money. I will say provider, but there's a whole bunch of baggage that goes along with provider. Because these women weren't talking about men to whom they had a commitment. They were talking about men who were simply providers of wealth and resources and opportunity to themselves. And that's the value that they saw in these men as individuals. And I'm so happy that I am not, by this definition, a real man. Thanks very much for watching, and have a great night.